And welcome back to another episode of Containers from the Couch. Today, we're going to have an interesting thing. I tweeted something about different three-letter words, which I promise I've got good meetings in the end. But today, we're going to be talking a little bit about RTO, RPO. We'll get into what those concepts are in a few seconds. But mostly, we're going to be talking about ECS and Resilience Hub. And I would like to introduce my two wonderful guests. First, Laura and Yariv. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's really great to meet you all. So I'm Laura Hyatt. I am the Solutions Architect for AWS Resilience Hub, and I'm in the UK.
Hey,
Yariv.
good evening. My name is Yariv. I'm a software engineer in the Resilience Hub team.
Perfect. Thank you very much. My name is Meisha Lokasing. I'm a developer advocate with ECS, and we're back for another episode of Containers from the Couch. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have a lot of viewers online, I see. Please leave your comments, your thoughts, your messages, whatever you would like in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them also live and also through the chat as well. So, Laura, firstly, I assume that a lot of our viewers at the moment know what ECS is, but I don't know if everybody knows what is Resilience Hub or why is it important?
Yeah, no, really great question. So if I just quickly share this, if I can. Let's go. All right, so before I get into Resilience Hub, I want to give a bit of context because it's probably a little bit different than the usual Containers from the Couch talks. But why are we talking about resilience? And actually, the reason why I put this sort of slide up with some definitions is because often we see, especially in AWS, the word reliability. We've got the reliability pillar of the well-architected, but actually resilience and reliability are two separate things. And I think resilience deserves to have some sort of light shined upon it. So reliability is when a workload performs kind of its intended function, which is obviously very, very important. But even more so, which I kind of think, resilience is actually when things don't go right, when something happens, when there is a disruption, whether that's partial or kind of full failure, how do you recover from that? How does your system cope with that? And I think that's really important. And so what Yariv is going to show you a little bit more in a demo is kind of when we're talking about ECS, how we can design resilient architectures for that. But actually, it's interesting because as a solutions architect, we're often told, you need to design resilient architectures and obviously make your containers resilient. But how do you actually do that? Because we don't publish, for example, data around our availability, our uptime, or how long it takes to recover, how the averages and things like that. We don't publish any of those numbers. But it is important to think about it in a data context. So when we're talking about resilience, it's important to put some numbers around it so you can actually build resilience to the degree that is important to your business. Because whether you're a sort of a tier one bank versus my blog, it's going to be very different on how long it's going to take you to recover and what your kind of threshold for risk is. So the way that we measure that is in the context of RTO and RPO. So RTO is a recovery time objective. So what is the maximum amount of time that is acceptable for either your application or your resources, individual resources, to recover? And then RPO is recovery point objective. So how much data, and this is in the context of time, again, is kind of your maximum threshold that is acceptable to you to lose in the event of an outage or disruption. But again, how do you actually calculate those in a sort of cloud model when we don't publish these numbers? And that is where AWS Resilience Hub comes in. So AWS Resilience Hub is a relatively new service. We've been out for about a year and a half now. It was reInvent 2021. And essentially, this is a service that provides that automated way to calculate the RTO and RPO of your current architecture, including containers. So what it is essentially, and Yariv will give you a demo, so it'll kind of make it a bit more easier to understand. But essentially, you give AWS Resilience Hub your architecture, so all the AWS resources that make up your architecture. And there's multiple different ways of doing that, and I'll kind of go into some terminology in a second. But you give it your architecture, And then you define your resilience policy. So those RTO and RPO for different disruption types. And again, Yariv will kind of show that. What is your resilience policy? What is your resilience sort of risk posture in that sense? And then essentially you run Resilience Hub. It does the assessment, essentially calculates based on your current architecture, are you going to meet your RTO and RPO objectives? And if not, then it will tell you how to re-architect to meet those RTO and RPO goals. And we also provide as well, so it doesn't just end there, we also provide what we call operational resilience. So these are a mixture of, we provide CloudWatch alarms that we recommend, and we actually provide the code snippets for those. We also provide SOPs, or standard operating procedures. So I like to call these kind of like automated best practices. And then also, which is really important, is the testing element. So it's all great doing kind of this calculation, you know, are you going to meet your RTO and RPO, kind of getting these kind of estimated numbers. But really the best way to understand resilience is through testing. And so we actually tie in with Fault Injection Simulator, which is another AWS service, which is AWS's chaos engineering service. And so you can actually test things like if, you know, an EC2 instance was to terminate, or your containers were to go down, or an overload of memory, CPU, things like that. And this is a really great way to actually understand what happens to your application in the event of these kind of disruptions and outages. So that's essentially what Resilience Hub is in a nutshell, but we're going to see more about that in a minute with the demo. But before we go into that, I wanted to do a little bit of terminology, just because I understand when you're going through a demo and kind of you're going to be talking about some things, it can be, you know, especially if there's new words, new concepts with Resilience Hub, I think it's always kind of good to kind of just go through some of those. So we've just talked about RTO and RPO, and I'm going to mention those again because they are very, very crucial. When we talk about resilience, these are the data points that you need to understand, you need to sort of work out. And it's absolutely fine if you have not worked these out or thought about these for your current applications. It is something that I would highly, highly recommend you do. But if you haven't, don't worry. As again, Yuri will show you in the demo, we do actually have some templated policies to kind of help you and get you started. But this is something that I think, you know, is worth looking into. But again, recovery point objective, the amount of data in a time measure that is sort of acceptable for you to lose in the event of an outage. And then recovery time objective, so the amount of time it takes for your application to come back up after a disruption. And then the concept of application. So it's interesting because this word obviously means many different things in the technology sphere. But in the case of Resilience Hub, and this is where I think it's crucial to kind of understand this, this is essentially all of the resources on AWS that make up a single workload. So, you know, again, a really sort of basic concept, but it's one that everybody understands, 3-tier website. So, you know, you've kind of got your database and your compute, all of those elements basically that make one single workload, and that is your application. And so that's kind of that ring-fenced kind of all those resources. So I kind of think that's what our application is on Resilience Hub. Then the application app component or application component. This is interesting because as we kind of know on AWS, often resources have kind of dependencies on other sort of smaller kind of concepts. So with a database, for example, you'll have your primary, but then you might also have a replica as well. Obviously, they are dependent and interlinked. And so you need to kind of understand that they are linked. They're not two separate independent resources. And so this is what app component is that grouping together. And then finally, your import source. So as I mentioned, you give AWS Resilience Hub your application, but how do you do that? So there are 4 methods to give Resilience Hub your application. You can either do that for CloudFormation, Terraform as well, if that's kind of your preferred infrastructure as code method. If you're more sort of ClickUp space, then you can use AWS resource groups. And then finally, also, you can use the app registry. So they're just some concepts, just kind of remember those. And now I'll hand it over to Yariv to actually show how this works for ECS.
So before we go over to Yariv, I want to just make another couple of comments. Firstly, we have a question from Mike. And Mike, I will get to your question later on in the show when we get more into details of Resilience Hub. Don't worry. But my question is, for example, who defines the RTO and RPO? Is it the same for all kinds of applications? How does that actually work?
Yeah, I mean, so great question. In the sense of who defines it in the concept of in your
For each application.
organization. Yeah, so in an organization, and again, I'm going to use the standard solutions architect terminology, it depends. And it really depends how your organization is obviously sort of set up. Obviously, if you've got sort of a large kind of organization, you might have a compliance function, and often they will do that. Whereas then if it's a small organization, you don't kind of have that function, then really it needs to be a joint conversation between business and technology. Because from a technology point of view, you kind of need to understand what is actually feasible. Like, sure, I'm sure a customer would love to go, I want a 0-0 RTO, RPO. In an ideal world, we'd love that. No data loss, it takes no time to recover. But is that actually feasible from an architecture point of view? So there kind of needs to be a discussion between the business and actually, how much can we afford to lose? How much is the impact going to be on our customers, on revenue, if we lose a certain amount of data or if our system's offline? But then also a conversation with technology being like, what is actually achievable? So really, it's kind of a joint conversation between the two. So it really depends kind of on the organization. But I would say these are not conversations that happen in isolation. The two functions need to work together, essentially.
Okay, thank you very much. Yariv, over to you.
Yeah, just take over the screen share. Everybody seeing well? Hearing well?
Yeah, make it a tiny bit bigger. I think maybe for everybody else on the screen it'll be a little bit easier if you can. Yeah, that should be good.
Awesome. So, we have created a nice ECS Resilience Hub demo. Without further ado, let's just create a new application. Provided a nice name. So Laura talked about it, the resource collections, and again, we support, that's like the ways to import a new application to Resilience Hub, like infrastructure as code tools and AWS services like Resource Group. We also recently launched the ECS integration. That's for another episode, but I just say briefly that you can import your EKS workloads using EKS cluster ARNs, again, for another time. So let's go on and choose CloudFormation stacks because I deployed my ECS workloads using AWS CDK. CDK, like very shortly, it's a tool by AWS to define infra as code in type, like many different programming languages, and it transpiles itself into CloudFormation stacks. We can choose either from the drop-down. I have just over here 2 CloudFormation stacks ARNs from 2 different regions. Whoops. So I can choose a CloudFormation stack ARN from every region that is supported by AWS Resilience Hub. And now we need to choose whether we want to define a scheduled assessment. So what this is essentially. These are daily assessments that Resilience Hub is running on behalf of customers. So why do we do that? Again, like linking to Laura's discussions, the philosophy of Resilience Hub is like continually assessing and monitoring your application. It's not like a one-time thing. Everything changes and breaks all the time. And we want customers to assess their applications continually, or so you can either do that using the scheduled assessment feature, or you could integrate Resilience Hub into your CI/CD pipelines. There are like AWS blogs about that. For the sake of this session, I think I'm going to disable it. The application configuration params kind of out of scope for today. So let's hit next. So what happens now is that Resilience Hub will scan the resource collections you have provided, the CloudFormation stacks, and we will automatically, it's kind of like stretched a little bit, we will find the resources and assign automatically app components to each of the resources. So it really depends on the service. Again, you could have like primary and replica database that might be the same app component. In the ECS context, both of our services got their own app component. We also have like an application load balancer here, each from one from USIS 1, one from USIS 2. Also got their own app component. We will see it later on and more about that. Questions so far?
So there were a couple of questions which have come up. The first one I think is, are there any cost implications for running these daily tests or regular tests on regular tests? In other words, what does it cost the customer?
Well, it does not cost. The Resilience Hub cost is per application per month. We don't charge by assessment.
Okay.
So just to clarify, so Resilience Hub costs $15 per month per application. There is a free tier. So for the first 6 months for 3 applications, you get them for free, so you can all play around with it. But yeah, you can run as many assessments as you like on a daily, multi-daily, and it's the same price.
The more the merrier. Also,
Yes.
going back to the scheduled assessment thing, I can't stress it enough. Continually assess your applications. It's crucial.
Because of course, as you say, things change over time. People, as we say, do ClickOps every now and again and change things where they probably shouldn't, and rather you should do them as infrastructure as code with the pipeline. But it's good to know that these things have changed, and it might affect your availability or your recovery in certain cases if those changes are made.
Yeah.
There was one other question regarding actually CDK and Resilience Hub. I don't know if you know the answer. Is there any constructs for Resilience Hub in CDK today?
There are constructs, but speaking like in the CDK, wait, I lost our stream. Yeah. So the CDK terminology, there are like L1, L2. So we're not, I think our constructs are L2. Don't count me on that, but we don't have like the official manually implemented ones.
Okay.
Right. But from that point, yeah, you can use CDK with Resilience Hub.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ashish, for your questions. We'll get to the rest of them and during the rest of the stream at the moment. Let's continue with the demo.
So I will kindly exclude the VPC subnets, the NAT gateways, as I want to keep our demo in the context of containers and ECS. So let me just do that. It will take few seconds. Yes, we can move on. So what happens now? We need to either choose or create a new resiliency policy. Let's create a new one, and we will talk a little bit again about the terminology that Laura talked about. We can either like set the target RTO and RPO across the 4 disruption types that Resilience Hub view your application against. We have the application, infrastructure, availability zone, and regional disruption types. I don't want to get deeply into each of them now. I want to do that when we will actually assess the application. But what we can do now is either like set manually the RTO and RPOs, or we can create a new one. We have suggested policies by Resilience Hub. So these are 7 different resiliency policies, RTO and RPO targets by disruption type. And as you go like down the list, you have like more strict numbers, like 30 seconds and 10 minutes regional. Today for our session, I'll go with the global critical one, 4 hours, 1 hour application, and you can see the rest. Create it and choose it. And we're also good to go and publish. We can like view the application just before we publish it. And let's do that. And we got our own brand new Resilience Hub applications. Let's view how it looks. So the application structure tab. We have here 3 different views of your application. We have the resources, just like we've seen in the import resources window before. Like you have the different regions and the ARNs, stuff like that, which resource collection they belong to. We can see the resource collections that the application is using, and we can see the app components, again, AWS resources that run and fail together. And we can see that each of the ECS services and the application load balancers got their own app components. So what we have here, this nice info banner, and what it tries to hint us about that Resilience Hub has detected multiple resource types, like resource types of the same type, like resources of the same type from multiple regions that might belong like logically into the same app component. Why did that happen? So sometimes there are limitations into like assumptions we can make about your workload. So for example, I provided here 2 CloudFormation stacks that actually are part of the same workload, but they are like kind of deployed separately, and customers will need to group them together manually. If we will have like more time toward the end of this section, maybe we can go back to that.
Okay.
Questions? I'll hit a new resilience.
So I think at the moment the questions that have come up are relatively. There was one question which came, which I don't know if you. The question was an active DR solution. Does Resilience Hub contribute to that? I think the answer would be that essentially it'll give you the alerts and the visualizations of if you're compliant to your policy, but it won't necessarily make you more active or more active passive. You'll have to design your own application, but this will give you the visibility into your solution, how you are against your actual goals and your requirements. Is that correct?
That's correct, Laura. I agree with this statement.
Yeah, so also this is about the resilience of your architecture, not necessarily disaster recovery as such. It's making sure that, think of it like the best practices to make sure that your architecture is resilient as possible. Yes, obviously recovery and disaster recovery is part of that, and we do actually tie in with DRS, for example, but it isn't necessarily a DR solution for this as well, just to kind of also make that sort of distinction.
So I think it ties into the next question, which Ashish had, with why would I want to use Resilience Hub, considering that I can already deploy my CDK applications in different regions. It'll take more time to restore. And I think it goes back to the point that it doesn't actually provide you with the resilience. It gives you the visualization, or are you compliant with your policy, yes or no? The tools that you use in the background how to replicate data, how to configure the data is all based on your configuration. And if you say CDK, will be done by that.
Yeah, think of this as an architectural helper tool to kind of understand how you architect better. Again, it's not the actual tool that is going to do the recovery for you. It's the tool that's going to show you, have you architected in a resilient manner? And also to the point that have you architected in a resilient, to the degree of resilience that is right for you? Because again, every customer is different. My little random blog, as I use the example, versus, you know, a tier one bank, very different RTO and RPO requirements. So understanding, are you meeting those requirements? This tool is going to help you with this. It's not going to do the recovery for you. It is a helper tool to understand, are you architecting to the resilience degree that you need to? And also remember as well, like there's a lot of, depending on what your business does, there's a lot of organizations that actually need to be able to show that they've done this calculation, that they've architected a degree. So if they're a regulated industry, finance, telecoms, some healthcare, they actually need some way to show regulators, hey, look, I've architected, and to the best of my knowledge, I am, you know, within a 1 hour RTO. And so this is also a tool that they can use to show those regulators as well. So some industries need that as well.
For anybody that's been through an audit once upon a time in their life, they'll probably need these as well, for sure.
Yeah.
We want to move on, or we have more questions? So we did kick off an assessment. I'll do that again and say that that's like the showtime of Resilience Hub. We analyze and assess everything in your application, scan everything, and like come up with the RTO and RPO estimated numbers, and provide you with the resiliency and operational recommendations, which we will show shortly. So let's go on and view the assessment. So like the first thing to notice is that the policy is breached. We are kind of good with most RTO, RPO disruption type metric, but we are missing in the regional RTO, and we will show why did that happen shortly. What we have along these nice expandable sections is like RTO, estimated RTO and RPO per app component, again, single, like a group of AWS resources. And we can see like the estimated RTO per like each load balancer and ECS service from each region. A little bit about how do we come up with those estimations. Like, again, to say estimated numbers, that's important. Customers also need like to test themselves regularly. That's important. We work with service teams like ECS, developer advocates in the ECS context, and come like with the benchmarks and best practices. So now I want us to, to speak a little bit about the 4 disruption types and the numbers. We can see not only the number, but also like a short message like that tells us what, like, how does that number correlates to the environment. In the case of this nice service, it was like an estimation based on like analyzing the service events. Application RTO, it's basically like generally speaking about Resilience Hub, it's like the time to redeploy something. So in the load balancer context, it would be like the estimated time to manually redeploy a new ELB, given that there was some failure. In the ECS service context, it's like the estimated time to redeploy a service. It varies a lot between different configurations. Obvious things like EC2 versus Fargate, number of desired counts, networking configs, health checks, and a lot of stuff that's going on behind the hood. Mage, you want to say something about that?
There was one question that I had here, which hasn't come in from the audience, but I would like to try and understand. For example, will this also take in? So if I have an application which is running, as we say, in US East 1 from one of the regions, and we're measuring how long it will take me to fail over or become available in a second based on my RTO and RPO. And my application currently in US East 1 is running 1,000 tasks.
Yeah.
Will this estimation take into account how long it will take me to scale up to 1,000 tasks in the other regions so that it will be able to measure the amount of time?
Yeah, it would definitely do that. But it will also try to estimate and understand whether you have multi-region workloads.
Okay.
You can fail over faster and not necessarily need to redeploy something a gigantic service.
Okay.
I think that maybe when we reach the regional RTO, it would make more sense, with more context.
Okay.
I hope it answered.
It did. And there was one other question which I also was coming to, is the fact of, we're talking about Resilience Hub integration today into ECS and Fargate and everything, which is container related also, as we said, also has support for EKS as well. But what about other services? Like, for example, my application is part of the stack which you imported is dependent on S3 or CloudFront or WEF.
Yeah.
Are all of those supported, or is there a list of supported services currently today?
So there is a nice list in the Resilience Hub documentation of the supported resources. Laura, if you could maybe paste it.
Let me see if I can find it in the meantime.
Yeah, I can send it to you. Yeah.
Definitely supported. And again, the philosophy of Resilience Hub, we split your application into app components. So the buckets might have and will have different RTO and different considerations and analysis that Resilience Hub does in respect to them, right?
Yeah, also just to add about so that's great. So just to kind of add to that, so we don't currently support every single service. There's 280 plus AWS services, working as fast as we can, but it will take a little bit of time. So S3 is supported, obviously being one of basically the backbone of AWS. CloudFront currently isn't supported. However, if that is something that you think is crucial to your workload and to use Resilience Hub, please do let us know. At the end of this presentation, we'll have our email addresses. We do
Twitter handles
build
on
out
the screen as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Because we do build out basically our roadmap and the next lot of supported services based on feedback. Of course, we want to build a service that works for you. So if CloudFront is the one that you need, let us know and we can look into that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I want to speak about infra and AZ failure disruption types together. Because I want to keep this session as much as possible in the context of ECS, and these have a lot in common, because the infra disruption type would be to understand whether you are running, and I'm talking about ECS terminology, if you're running in a multi-container instance environment. So for example, this very simple service runs with a desired count of 1 in a single AZ. That's why we are reporting to the customer that the workload is running on a single physical container instance. And there is a very long message there that attempts to tell the customer what happens with that number. If you would have a container instance disruption, a new container instance would need to spin up and the service would need to redeploy.
Okay.
That makes sense.
It does.
the exact same thing here goes, and again, simplified stack. Same thing goes for the fact that we run here the tasks in a single availability zone. So in a case of AZ disruption, we would need to do just the same in a new AZ. Questions? I see some.
There is something which I think we might need to clarify, which might be slightly confusing. A lot of questions are coming up. Firstly, also from Mike's original question, which was, let me find it over here on the screen, which was, will Resilience Hub enable reporting values that are higher than service SLAs? In other words, for example, ECS guarantees uptime of 4 nines. Other services have 5 nines, 3 nines, whatever it may be. The second question was, if the service's RTO is higher than ECS's RTO. I don't think we're talking about, we don't guarantee, firstly, as AWS, we don't publish, we don't give any guarantees on RTOs or RPOs from our services. Those are internal aspects. We give a SLA of availability of the APIs which are available. So there's 2 different concepts. Am I correct, Laura?
Yeah. So so maybe there's a bit of misconception here. So AWS's SLAs are based on the service availability. So whether that's 99.99%, whatever it is for that particular service. An RTO is a different concept. So availability is, yes, the amount of projected time on the SLA time that a service is due to be available. That doesn't mean that your application won't have disruptions, because disruptions can be for different things. As Yariv said, a disruption could be that actually the infrastructure is healthy, so that container technically is healthy, and so that SLA still stands, but your application is facing a disruption, and that could be because of bad code deployment, anything, that someone's accidentally deleted something, so human error. So there then needs to be, then there's an RTO. How long does it take you to recover that application because of that disruption? But that is different. So technically the service is still running and up, and so that availability and that SLA is still standing. So it's 2 different concepts here. So RTO and RPO is around disruption. So the how long it takes you to recover if the disruption to your own application. And then AWS's SLAs around availability is the availability of that service itself that AWS has. So they're the 2 different concepts. So hopefully that's kind of clarified that.
It does, but there was one other question, which I think Mike has a point. There are some of our database services which do have defined RTOs and RPOs between, like, for example, how long it will take to fail over from one to the other. So I assume that is incorporated in the rules and the logic of the estimations we do for Resilience Hub?
Yeah, so we work with the different service teams for all of the different services. So we obviously talk and make sure we get all the data from these different service teams. So it's a mixture of kind of benchmarking, also obviously input from your own application. But so what is in obviously that documentation is obviously fed into our system as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Yuri, why do we have a nice red thing in the bottom which says it's unrecoverable?
Yeah. What happened here? Our region RTO, aggregated RTO, is unrecoverable because Resilience Hub says that the 2 ECS services are unrecoverable. And let's view the message. It says that the workload contains resources only from ECS2. If you're replicating workloads in multiple regions, they must be grouped in the same application component.
Okay.
So, like, throwing back to the info banner that told us that we might need to group them together, we didn't do that. We might do it. I'm not sure about timing, but if we would to do that and reassess the application, the numbers would change and we would not be unrecoverable, because Resilience Hub will detect that they belong to the same workload, and then like we have readiness, some sort of readiness for failover. In the context, like to give more context, we are like really want to understand like whether you are obviously ready for regional failover in the context of ECS, like if we would need to redeploy the service, like can we restore the state? Can we really use the same image that was used from region A to region B? It changes between different configurations a lot. Yeah, just saying that.
So there was I have another question here, because I also have, you said there, so the reason that it's unrecoverable is because we have 2 ECS services deployed in 2 different regions and we didn't match them together.
Yeah.
Group them together. Now, assuming that we did group them together, how would Resilience Hub recognize that they belong to each other? Based on what kind of parameters? Only this, we just manually group them, or is there some logic going on in the background?
The manually grouping tells us, oh, let's assess them in the same like point of view.
Okay.
But a lot will still happen in the assessment itself. If like, did that answer?
It did, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's move on and see the resiliency recommendations. So these are like very important part of the Resilience Hub assessment. We provide each of the app component like configurations, like changes to be made upon your workload in order to achieve like a more resilient state. We have like different like optimization types, like for cost or changes or best regional RTO and RPO. Just like glancing on the ELB configurations, you could have different like multiple configurations like that. Some of them like are optimized for cost, and some of them are optimized for like best regional RTO and RPO. I do want us to focus on the ECS, obviously. So the provided configuration is like it's like multi-region ECS workload spread across multiple availability zones. The changes are like needed changes to be made in your workload in order to achieve to reach this nice configuration. So we can see here like add replication in another region, or like add more subnets in different AZs in order to run tasks in multiple regions and multiple availability zones. We are also provided with an estimated cost. Note that it could vary, depend on the actual usage when you actually make the changes. And we are provided with the newly estimated RTO and RPOs across the four disruption types. And like, how did we come up with that number? So for example, here we've reached, we are running in a multi-AZ manners. So we are in 0 seconds. Or for the region, we are now running in like a multi-region workload, and no downtime expected in that case. Questions?
Not a question, but only a comment. It's very interesting to see that the fact of that you've thought of a lot of things which are not necessarily ECS directly related. In other words, the fact of working according to the well-architected framework and the recommendations of multiple AZs, the fact that you should have, essentially, the one thing which I was actually very surprised was the fact that you're also checking to see that the images, even though it's not actually ECS, are also located in the other region, that I can start them up in the other location. They're up to date as well with all the tags, I assume, as well, to make sure that all those images, you can set up, of course, the replication with ECR in order to replicate your images on your own. But these are things which you take into account as the amount of details to make sure that if or when you need to fail over to a different location or different availability zone, everything will automatically or will be there for you, so you don't have to start scrambling to recreate resources during the outage.
Yeah, I think also just to kind of add to that, I think it's important, while obviously AWS has many different services and we have to think of them as kind of these Lego blocks, we talk about them, they don't work in isolation as such. They kind of interact with each other. There's different components to them. So while we're talking about ECS, there's other things on the peripheral that you need to make your overall architecture work, because that ECS service and that container isn't the only thing, or probably isn't the only thing that is making up your application. And so it is important to kind of look at this like from a holistic view, with all the kind of other services taken into account as well, not just ECS on its own.
Yeah.
I want to quickly jump because we are like
15 minutes to go, just under 15 minutes left.
Time. Actually, 15 minutes is nice because we can see like the operational recommendations. If we have no more questions about that.
At the moment, no.
Yeah. So again, these are artifacts provided by Resilience Hub in order to increase the resiliency of your application, obviously. So we have three different type of artifacts. We have CloudWatch alarms. Currently, only CloudWatch is supported. So we have CloudWatch alarms to detect a disruption. We have standard operating procedures, or SOPs. Again, these are SSM systems, AWS Systems Manager, another service that helps you automate stuff with other AWS resources and services. So these are SSM documents that provide some sort of like actions.
Actions
in order to like recover from an outage. And we have the FIS templates to test yourself. So alarms for the alarms to detect, SOPs to recover, and FIS to test. FIS again for the injection system, another AWS service for chaos engineering. Yeah, and that's it pretty much. Do we have some? Okay, just a quick thing before we move on. If we actually want to implement one of them, what would happen is that we would choose this nice SOP. It create CloudFormation template, and it create. I don't want to do that. We don't have that much time. Resilience Hub will create an S3 file for you that contains a CloudFormation template that you can modify, and it will help you implement this artifact.
Very nice.
Very, very quickly, could you just go to the full injection experiment tab and just open up the description? So just to kind of highlight, because I think it's really worth. So I know if anyone's used FIS kind of natively, you'll know that there's some sort of there's a small amount of tests at the moment, and we have added some additional tests through Resilience Hub. So if you are if you are interested in chaos engineering and want to run on more services, so like ECS, for example, we do actually include some chaos engineering tests for ECS. You can kind of see here, and simulate when ECS has failing tasks, for example. So this is a really great way to actually see what actually happens to your system. For anyone who's not familiar with chaos engineering, because I know my background is, this is actually where you do actually create a real disruption. I will say that this is something which starts off in sort of your test environment. Don't go straight to prod, because you do actually put stress and actually create disruption to your application. So definitely run this in a test environment first. The principles of chaos engineering are to do this in production, but I will say don't go straight there. But yeah, so for example, this is a really great way to test actually disruptions to your ECS service.
So we can either, end the demo here and like wrap up, or we could maybe go and like group them and reassess. Not sure, like we will have time for that. Nish, what do you think?
Yeah. So there was only one thing I wanted to ask about. Resilience Hub is available as a service in every region, or only specific regions today?
It's available in, it's not available in every single region. So it's available in most, and obviously we can paste the link in. So for example, it's obviously not available in China for sort of many different reasons. Some of the newer regions, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly, but we will add support. I believe as well, we don't currently support Singapore. There's some reasons around chaos testing that limits our sort of deployment there, but most of the regions. But I would advise check before you have a look. But most of the regions.
But I think the interesting thing is that you can import resources from different regions as CloudFormation templates, regardless of where they're deployed.
Yeah, it's if you want
correct?
to run, say, what I mean is if you want to run Resilience Hub in that region, because it is a regional service.
Yes.
So if you were in US East 1, for example, and you went into the services and typed in Resilience Hub, you would find it available. But for example, you wouldn't find it available in China, for example.
Yeah. So Rezo011 had a question of, can I apply Resilience Hub on a CloudFormation created from CDK code? I assume yes, because CDK in the end does create a CloudFormation stack, and you'll be able to import those resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. Probably would be more easier to create a new stack and create we are supported in CloudFormation, obviously. But yeah, potentially you could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a CloudFormation stack, then absolutely, you can select that. Yeah.
Okay, and this one maybe because I don't know the answer for this one, Laura. Does the identification work with public and private CFN registry extensions?
I do understand it. I want to say yes.
But because we're not sure, we'll get back to you. So do me a favor, ping one of us after the show, and we'll have an answer for you. Will be the best. Because as AWS people, we don't like giving statements which we're not 100% sure of. So in this case, please give us a ping afterwards. We'll get back an answer for you.
Mm-hmm.
You can get all of us on either of us on our social media, which is located here on the screen.
It is indeed. Those are the questions.
What's next for Resilience Hub?
Yeah, so if I just share mine one, although I don't. There we go.
This one?
There we go. Perfect. Yes, perfect. Yeah, so we have lots coming out this year. So we've got a full sort of calendar roadmap. Obviously, I can't share at the moment what is on that roadmap, but we are going to be providing a couple of new service supports. So the link was in that chat as well. That currently is the sort of the current list, but we'll be adding support for other services, and we're also adding in some new features as well. So not necessarily new service support, but some additional features, which I'm really excited about. And I'm actually working on something sort of industry specific as well, to make it sort of more applicable to certain industries. So there's lots going on there. We do want to hear from you though. So there's a number of different things. So obviously part of my job is very much customer facing. So I am literally the global solutions architect for AWS Resilience. So it doesn't matter where you're located. If you just want to learn more, deep dive into it, go into a technical deep dive, build a POC, or just generally ask questions, please do let me know. My email address is on the screen. Send me an email. We can set up a chat. More than happy to talk to you about all things Resilience Hub. And of course, if you've got any comments about if you've played around with it and you've got any feedback, we'd also love to hear from you as well, because as I said, we kind of build out our roadmap based on your feedback, essentially. Also, which I didn't include on this slide, but if you follow me, my little Twitter handle is in my name underneath my picture. We do actually also have a full calendar across the world of what we're calling architectural resilience days. So Resilience Hub is included in this, and it's not the only thing. So if you're generally interested in building more resilient architectures on AWS, and we're hosting in-person architectural resilience days. So you'll basically get hands-on, do workshops. Resilience Hub included, but also if you're interested, as I mentioned, chaos engineering, so deep diving into that, but also disaster recovery, which I know was kind of mentioned, and also the correction of error process. So actually, it's great that you've kind of recovered from this, but the main thing is you've got to learn about it, how to improve upon it. And so we do like a full day, and these are hosted literally whether you're in EMEA, in APAC, whether you're in the US or LATAM, and we've kind of got a full calendar going on for the rest of the year of these days. If you follow me on Twitter or just have a look at my Twitter, I posted the link. I'll post it again after this conversation, and I'll post a link to all the ones that are live. So yeah, please do attend one of those if you want to sort of learn more about how to architect more resiliently on AWS.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yariv, any final words that you would like to share with us?
Thanks to everyone, and I hope you enjoyed. And next time, ECS.
We'll make sure we get that on the calendar. I want to thank everybody for joining today. From the comments in the chat, the questions were amazing. The interaction was very good. If you have any questions for us, please give us a ping. Specifically, that one question about the private CFN registry extensions or public ones. We'll give you an answer after we find the correct answer, yes or no. Thank you very much for joining again for Containers from the Couch. Please don't forget to hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and push on that notification button so you'll get notifications for new episodes, which we are streaming regularly. Any feedback you have, either on ECS or Resilience Hub, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.